Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I had an amazing one. We went out to eat at a chain restaurant, the Claim Jumper, and while the service was slow and the food was very average, it made things easy. And that's what this week was all about for my family. Things were easier this week. Ange was totally out of pain for the first time since our nightmare started. Her complications are handled. And finally, it's time to see our cancer doctor again. His office has already set up almost 25 appointments for us in the coming months. So we know our game plan. Our calendar is full. And next up, we see Dr. Diamond again for the first time since Halloween. We go to the cancer center, and again, we are the youngest by far. And when Diamond comes in the room, he knows all about Ange's painful experience last week with the wire getting caught up inside her like she was a fish on a hook. And he lets us know how terrible that was and that he heard about it and he feels awful. This is reassuring because every other doctor that we've had needs to be briefed about what happened at our last appointment. No one ever looks at our charts before they enter the room, and everybody's completely confused when we try to explain what's going on. So we're happy to know that Dr. Diamond does his homework. On top of that, he's confident, and we can feel that confidence in the air, and that's really important. Anyways, Diamond orders blood work, he goes over our schedule, and he has Anne sign some papers, which is the real reason for our visit. These chemo drugs are serious. I was reading over the side effects, and there are so many. The one that really stood out to me was about cold fingers and toes that could also go numb. Diamond says that almost everyone experiences this, and sometimes it can become permanent. The waiver Ange signed acknowledges all of this, and she accepts her fate. Our next cancer appointment is a chemo class on Monday that we could have done online on a Zoom call, but Ange wanted to go in, and shit, I guess I wanted to go in too, so we're going in for that. Then next Tuesday, it's port insertion day, so she'll have a port put in around her heart so they can drop chemo drugs right into her bloodstream, and then chemo starts for us on Thursday. And when I say for us, I will be sitting next to my wife, but she's the one who's getting all of these drugs. So that's the update. It's an exciting one for us. Next week is when this thing starts, and we are psyched to finally be in the starting gate. It's been a month of just like getting ready to fight chemo and knowing that she had cancer and hoping that it's not spread, so we're finally there. The final thought about Diamond and our appointment there was when we were there the first time, it was Halloween day. And the talk of the office wasn't just about cancer. It was about how many trick-or-treaters Dr. Diamond would get. I guess he lives in a nice neighborhood, one that gives out the big bars. And on our way out of this appointment, we asked him, "Hey, Diamond, how many trick-or-treaters did you get?" Because you could tell it was a thing of pride when they were talking about it in the office before. And with zero hesitation, he's like, "We got 1,000. I was anticipating 1,500. And if you're wondering, we had 4 total kids come over to our house. Speaking of kids, my kid has been skateboarding a shit ton this past year. It was an issue during football season as he had to miss 2 games and a bunch of practices because of repeated tailbone injuries. But it's awesome that he loves it. You know, I don't stay at the park with him to watch him skate, and I don't really skate with him that much either. He'd rather skate with his friends rather than his inline skater dad. But a few days ago, I hung around Delridge Park to watch him skate, and it was so cool to see his progress. He's no longer the little kid at the skate park, and his style has gotten so much more relaxed, and you can tell that he knows what he's doing. So full-on proud dad moment there, and I need every one of those that I can get. But getting back to skateboarding with my kid, it kind of brought up a funny guest-related story. On the way to taking my kid and his buddy to the skate park on Thanksgiving morning, my kid's like, "Dad, you know who Shaun White is, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And he's like, "Did you know that he's a skateboarder too?" And his buddy's like, "Yeah, did you know that he skateboards too?" I'm like, "Boys, what the hell do you think I do for a living? Of course I know this." And while I don't think I've ever tried to get Shaun White on the podcast before, I know I have ways to get in touch with him. And in the near future, I'm going to try to get him on the show. Just because my kid and his friend, who both ski and have never skated vert before in their lives, were trying to drop Shaun White knowledge on me. So I'll work on that one at some point. But this week, it's a business episode. And my guest is a good friend of mine. A guy who started in the ski industry, managing mountains on the East Coast. Then he worked his way into Red Bull, launching markets across the United States. These days, Pete Moran spends his days running the ZJ Marketing Group, who's responsible for managing talent from Seahawks to Sounders to brand activations to experiential and immersive marketing experiences. Pete's story is another very interesting and totally different way to create a dream job within the action sports space. Before I talk to Pete, I want to thank a couple of people who have helped me remain sane during my wife's cancer experience. because I've needed some time to myself. And really, the only time I get is riding my bike, and I do that religiously. And if I wasn't addicted to looking at all my stats on my Oura Ring, and I didn't have Nema vitamins to fuel me, I don't know if I would ride as much. So I need to thank Dave Goto at Oura Rings and thank Josh Lubeck at Nema for fueling me and giving me all my stats. If you want a deal on vitamins, head on over to nemabrand.com, enter the code POWEL25 at checkout, and you're going to get 25% off your Nema vitamins. Also, I will say that I'm getting a lot of messages from people I don't know, and it's amazing how incredible this is. It's a heavy time, but it's also so appreciated to hear that a random person woke up and is thinking about my family. This stuff means more than you can possibly imagine. So thanks to everyone reaching out to support friends, family, and strangers. Finally, I want to ask you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. And tell your friends about the show, because word of mouth really helps this thing grow, and your friends are going to be stoked that you told them. Last but not least, it's time to call out my sponsors, and Outdoor Research has turned back on their 25% discount code. You can find out all the details and get that code in their ad in this podcast. Stanley also has a 30% off code in their ad, so please check that out. And then we've got Elan Skis that'll make you a better skier, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports where you can buy those Elan skis, and the 10 Barrel Brewery makes all of this stuff a little easier to swallow. And bonus points to anyone who films all of this on their GoPro Hero 11 Mini. Now, it's time to talk to everyone's good friend, Pete Moran. You grew up in an area that I know from college, southwestern Virginia. I'm from northern Virginia. And you can hear the distinct difference in our accents. With yours, do people ever judge you because of it? Like, have you ever felt that people are looking at you and judging you based on the sound of your voice?
Yeah, man. Like, especially out here in the West Coast, people are a little bit like, whoa, what's this guy doing working in sports or working up at the ski area with people and have an accent? But that's where I'm from, and that's in my DNA, and proud of my roots.
Where we're from, especially where you're from, because you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, and being down there, there's a lot more racism than there is up in Northern Virginia, at least growing up from what I saw. Did you see any of that shit growing up, being that you're from where I consider the South to start?
I mean, look, Mike, racism's everywhere. And I think just because there's less people of color or this or that in certain areas, it really doesn't matter where. I was really lucky. My parents brought me up in a loving type of family and relationship that treat everyone equal. But, it's no different than out here in Seattle or down in NorCal or wherever. Racism's everywhere. And I've seen it over the years working with different athletes and different facets. It's just there. We got a lot of work to do still on that topic.
For sure. I mean, I just know that when I went to school at Radford University, we actually watched the Klan march through Radford, and it was like a scary, powerful thing. And that only happens in like Virginia and states down south like that. I was wondering if you had seen anything crazy like that that's scary and powerful and disgusting.
I mean, it doesn't only happen there. I've seen it happen here in Seattle. I've seen certain members of the Seahawks team be profiled or be stopped. And then as soon as they figured out who they were, it instantly 180'd on a dime. So it just doesn't happen there. It happens everywhere. And it's really been obvious to me over the years, working with a lot of athletes and seeing people's perception change once they realize what they do, but they were instantly judged on their color in an elevator.
And judging people is not something that you seem to do, which I think is like the key to your success. You're the one guy that knows everyone, from the guy working at 7-Eleven to the guy renting paddle boards to every single one of your neighbors. Like, you don't just casually meet people. And I've never seen anything like it, just the way that you make friends. Have you always been that way?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of, let's give a shout out to Rohan, my guy at 7-Eleven. He always throws down on the lace up, for an extra donut for my son or something. He's the man. But yeah, I was raised that way. My mom and dad were that way. And I think it's awesome to have a smorgasbord of friends from all different walks of life. In high school, my friend Timmy St. Clair, you would go to his house and his parents made moonshine. And, they had quite a few cars on cinder blocks. And then in the same breath, my friend David Smith, his dad was the city manager. So it really doesn't matter what or how or who you are. It's just, are you a good person or not? And I just want to be around good people.
And your parents, who both I know are great people, and I think they're pretty well off. Growing up, it's your mom, dad, sister, and yourself. What's the family business?
My mom and dad owned radio businesses growing up. My dad started out as a janitor at a radio station in his late teens. And later on in his life, he ended up owning a good handful of radio stations from as far north as Virginia, as far south as South Carolina. They were self-made entrepreneurs, and just the way they ran that business and the type of people that they hired and worked with, I learned a lot from that growing up.
And then it doesn't sound like you come from a big ski family. Like your ski vacations early on started with church groups.
That's correct. I mean, growing up in Virginia, people don't realize there is a lot of ski areas in Virginia, West Virginia. In fact, some of the mountains in North Carolina are always the first to open. But yeah, I would go up, I would join church groups. Once I got up to the mountains, I got that bug. And so at that point, after I got that bug, I was doing anything and everything to figure out how I could get back up there to make turns and to get up on those mountains.
And is your family going at all, or is it something that you have totally to yourself?
We had some family friends, the Smiths, that had a condo at a place called Wintergreen, Virginia. So we would go up there with them. And outside of that, my parents, they saw how much I loved the sport. And so after that, they started making it easier for me to get up there. And that's still one of my, and I talk about it with a lot of people in the ski and snow industry. And even was talking about it with Jeremy Jones, your last guest, is the ski business still has done a horrible job of making the sport accessible. And I think, they look at themselves and they go, well, we got to get more people ski. Like we got to sell more skis or we got to sell more snowboards. But the really great way to grow the sport is to actually go out there instead of competing for people in the pie, which I think is something that the ski business, the snow business, they have to do. Like if you're working at Rosenall, you want to get the people from K2 or whatever. But outside of that, like go out and invest in getting more people up on the mountain to get the bug. And, Shane McConkey, who is a good friend of ours, Mike, like that's one of the things I loved about Shane. He was always trying to bring new people to the sport. Blake, he does a great job of still doing it, but there's not many people out there that are going around bringing new people to the sport. I think the industry as a whole talks to themselves in a mirror.
Well, I do agree with you there, but we are way far ahead of ourselves talking about the ski industry because getting back to sport-wise, you killed it in the country club sports, or at least tennis. You were a 2-time state champion tennis player, and I'm guessing that shit's got to be really serious if you're a 2-time state champion. How much did tennis dominate your life in high school as well?
We were obsessed. We would play every day, 5-7 days a week. It was regiment. But in the same breath, we were the anarchists in tennis. We were really, really good. We played and practiced year round. We were state runner-up once and state semifinalist once, but all 4 years in high school we played in state. But we had an ear-piercing gun, and every time we won state, we would pierce our ears on the bus. We were anything but typical tennis. We took it real seriously, but we were John McEnroe style.
I would think there's a little party element too, because there's always something fun going on with Pete. And when you first get your driver's license, that's when I think you start going to Wintergreen on your own. I think about Wintergreen because I grew up going to Wintergreen as well. I don't know if we've ever talked about this, but my parents had a place on Diamond Hill at Wintergreen, and we spent years going there. So that's kind of where my formative years as a skier started. But for you, you're like a sophomore in high school or a junior in high school. You get a job ski instructing up there, and it turns out to be decent money. And what's the story behind you going up there and renting your own place as like a junior in high school?
Yeah, again, really blessed to have the parents I had that supported me in what I wanted to do. But yeah, at the time, Wintergreen, which that's pretty close to DC, pretty close to Richmond, Virginia, they were the highest paying ski school in the country at the time.
Huh.
And at the time, you brought up tennis. My dream job was to be a tennis pro in the summer and a ski school director in the winter. And there was a guy named Clay Robinson that had that job. So I go up there, I interview, I do this clinic. They broke the rules there. They could see how bad, like I wanted the job. I was willing to do anything. And so, I got the job. And this guy, Jeremy, who I keep in touch to this day, he was the president of his fraternity. He was a first-year ski instructor as well. And so, I was making $1,200, $1,400 a paycheck in high school, living with a guy at UVA that was the president of his fraternity. It was a good pre-college education.
That just sounds amazing. So it was pretty much like you were a ski instructor / party god at Wintergreen for a couple years, your junior, and senior year in high school?
I wouldn't say a party guy, but I would say we had a lot of fun. Jeremy was the president of his fraternity, so there was a lot of people and women, and young people all in the condo, and it was crazy. I had my own condo up there at Cliffhanger, kind of near where your folks were on Diamond Hill. It was a beautiful view.
And then after that, when it comes time to college for you, you head to Davis and Elkins University in West Virginia, and you're like an hour from the best skiing in the Southwest, which is Snowshoe Mountain. Is that why you went to Davis and Elkins, or was it to play tennis, or both?
It was both, and it was in the Southeast, Mike, not the Southwest. It's in the middle of the sticks in West Virginia, and I will spare everyone from my horrible West Virginia jokes, but it was a special place. And so Davis and Elkins College is in between three ski resorts, Timberline, Canaan Valley, and Snowshoe Mountain. So combined, those resorts do almost 1 million skier visits a year, and have a 13-state marketing region. And so I knew that I could get up there. I got a tennis scholarship. I would go up there and play tennis for Davis and Elkins, and then I would take summer schools at D&E, as they call it. And so I'd take 12 credit hours in the summer so that I could ski Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but then just barely have enough credit hours to keep my tennis eligibility. So it was a perfect mix.
Well, it's amazing. And then were you in a fraternity in college as well, or is that just my imagination?
I was.
We don't need to know what the house was, but we do need to know what the stupidest thing that was funny that you saw happen in your fraternity that you probably couldn't get away with these days, but back then it was commonplace.
I think there's a lot of things that you could get away back then. And then also keep in mind, we were in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. So there might have been some jock straps used with some hard-boiled eggs, Mike. Rumor has it.
I don't even know what that means, but we'll leave it at that. People can use their imagination. And West Virginia and snowshoe in general is a totally different animal. It's the greatest skiing for the Southeast. I called it Southwest before. But the array of people that go there and the style is really entertaining to someone who doesn't go skiing at Snowshoe very often. Did you see a lot of hunting gear and NASCAR stuff and random kits on the mountain?
Yeah, and I saw a lot of potential in those people to be awesome skiers. It was nothing to see someone in their Canadian tuxedo ripping down the mountain. There were people that would hunt in the morning and go skiing in the afternoon. There were people from Florida there, people from Alabama there. It's definitely a mixed bag of demographic. That place markets as far south as Florida, all the way up to Pennsylvania. So you get quite a mix of folks coming out.
You've always been a go-getter from what I know. And when you go to Davis and Elkins and you're planning on skiing at Snowshoe, do you pursue work at Snowshoe right when you get there? Like, hey, I'm not just going to go ski there. I'm going to get paid to ski there and be an instructor there. Or how does that whole thing work at Snowshoe?
Yeah, I did. And there's a guy named Mark Rodolini, who at the time was the ski school director at Snowshoe. I reached out to MR, was like, hey, I'm coming up here. And I've actually already taught skiing before. And I'd been certified in PSIA, Professional Ski Instructors of America, or as Shane McConkey would call it, poles stuck in armpits. And so I went up there, and right out the gate, I started teaching at Snowshoe, and again, set myself up with a condo. Like I had my room at Davis and Elkins, and then I had a place up on the mountain so I could just stay up there and teach. It was my passion.
Does it kind of go from you being an instructor and doing work on the mountain at Snowshoe to realizing that you want to have a future in the ski business that's probably not going to be on the hill, and you take like an internship or something like that with Snowshoe at that point?
Yeah, at the time I was doing staff training for their ski schools, and there was an opportunity as a marketing coordinator. And so I left and joined the marketing team and at the time Snowshoe was owned by Intrawest. So that also had a lot of upsides and fit with my trajectory. So yeah, I joined the marketing squad after that. I had a cubicle.
I was going to ask, is it kind of corporate? I mean, because you're in West Virginia and things are a little bit different the way they're run there. But then when you have Intrawest being the head of it and they're like the most corporate thing in skiing at that point, do you feel like corporate tentacles reaching to West Virginia?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. And it was a lot of changes. And then Intrawest quickly learned, too, that some of their policies and things weren't applicable to the West Virginia ski lifestyle. But yeah, I mean, at the time they had Tremblant, Whistler, Mammoth, Mountain Creek, Sandestin in Florida, Copper. They had a huge panorama. They had a huge roster of resorts. And then you can imagine it was appealing to them to pick up Snowshoe because at the time it was doing over 500,000 skier visits. But in the same breath, it was a different beast than any other resorts they had. I would love to hear, there was a guy, Ed Petoniak, and think Joe Hassan was the CEO, but I remember they'd come to Snowshoe and just get blown away with the après ski lifestyle up there. The people from the South like to let their hair down and kick it. And so they were used to like après ski style at some of the other mountains they had. And so I think probably the alcohol sales up at Snowshoe would triple any other mountain Intrawest owned, but it was definitely a corpo. It took about 2 years for them really to get adjusted to having that type of resort.
I can see that happening. And for you, you're in the transition from graduating college to getting a real job at Snowshoe. Not that you didn't have a real job before, but is it pretty much a given that when you graduate, you're going to become the marketing manager at Snowshoe? Have you kind of positioned yourself for that?
Yeah, I did. And at that time, make no mistake, I would stay up there in the summer, it was hell. I hated it. And at the time, like we were just getting Norba mountain bike races and things like that. But I wanted it so bad, I would be willing to do anything. And, at the time, I'm old, so we didn't have email campaigns and things like that. We were sending mailers. So I was up there licking envelopes in the summer, doing whatever it took to make sure I cemented my job up there year round.
So when you get that full-time job, you kind of put in the work ahead of time to get hired full-time and you're the marketing manager. What are the kinds of things that you're doing to move the needle at Snowshoe? Are there some funny West Virginia-based promotions, like a coal miner lift ticket day or shit like that?
We didn't have coal miner lift ticket day. We won some awards from the National Skiers Association because we were creating programs for kids that, made good grades to come up and ski. But also one of the most outrageous things that I got to do was, if you imagine, it was hard to get employees up in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. Even though that resort would do, 10,000 plus skier visits during a day, getting people to work up there year round, they call it the island in the sky. One summer, the mountain rented me an RV and I got to go around, all the way to Florida, to Georgia, to football games, to Peter Glenn ski shows in Atlanta. I caught up with Blake down there. Like I got to go all over and promote skiing, but also my main goal was to recruit employees to work up at the mountain. In fact, I was in Sandestin for 9/11, getting their summer employees to try to work up at Snowshoe in the winter. So there were some crazy things we did up there to make it all work, and it ended up working, and it was a good run.
While you have this job at Snowshoe, you end up getting your first taste of fame, or at least your first 15 minutes of fame. How in the hell do you end up on People Magazine's Most Eligible Bachelor of the Year, or whatever that thing was? Because I saw the picture in the page in People Magazine of Pete Moran, Most Eligible Bachelor, and I was like, holy shit, I know that guy.
Oh, Mike. Yeah, that was an interesting deal. Some of the folks from Intrawest, and like you mentioned earlier, I was willing to do whatever it took up there. So I'd made a name for myself within the Intrawest organization, and People Magazine had reached out to the Vancouver office at Intrawest, to the communications department, and multiple people at that organization nominated me. And I'm like, what the hell? No way. I got a snowball's chance in hell. And the lady came up from People Magazine. She flew in from New York City to interview me up in the middle of nowhere. She was kind of scared to death. And, at that time, I was just like, this is fun. I was authentic to the core with her, and we made sure she had a good time as well. But I take off to go to Alaska with my family, and lo and behold, they call and say you made the cut. So that's how that happened. It was definitely an interesting ride.
Did you get recognized, or did you get clowned, or what was the reaction from everyone that you knew and even strangers?
See all the above. What was crazy is people could email you through the magazine. Email was just getting going, and you're freaking 24 years old, and they hand you 8,000 emails of people that, mainly women, that reached out to meet you through the magazine.
Did you ever meet anyone from those emails?
Yeah, I did, actually. I would travel. Yeah, I'd be like, hey, you email me. I'm in Breckenridge, or hey, you email me, and I'm up at Okemo, Vermont to take my level 3 exam for PSIA. Like, you want to ski? And so, yeah, I met some cool people through there. I was young. It didn't matter. I didn't have any obligations, wasn't tied down to anyone. So, yeah, I enjoyed the whole ride.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with Elon Skis. And I'm in love with both my Ripstick 106 Black Edition and the 96 Black Edition. They are so fun and lively, all while remaining light and stable. And I'm not the only person who thinks these ski better than the competition. Both of these skis were named editor's picks in Free Skier magazine tests. So the pros out there, the testers, everyone who's actually getting on these skis, they know they're the best skis. I'm telling you they're amazing too. You're going to feel the difference because great product is why Elan is building a cult following in the US. But what's really amazing about the brand is that they built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art factory. And their independence from fossil fuels, along with that new solar plant, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. They're putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to the planet. So to find out about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Next up is Outdoor Research. They've been building award-winning outerwear and gear in Seattle since 1981. For 40 years, badasses in the mountains have trusted OR gear to be the best, and they still are. But when you head over to outdoorresearch.com these days to see their new line of product, you're going to notice some major differences. While OR still makes that badass technical gear you've come to trust, they've branched out and hired new cutting-edge designers who have their fingers on the pulse to create new fits, cuts, styles, and colorways that are still functional, but now styled to look great at the resort, in the park, in the backcountry, at the bar, or even a night on the town. And there really is so much new stuff to check out from OR. It's not just outerwear. I'm stoked because everything looks so good that I'm about to have a full OR wardrobe. And if you want to do that, I'm going to help you make it happen by getting you 25% off all non-sale items. So go shopping at outdoorresearch.com, and when you check out, enter the code POWEL25. That's all caps and numbers with no spaces, and you'll get the deal. Please note that you won't be able to use the code on OR Pro products. My final sponsor this round is GoPro. And if you aren't using a GoPro for your POV footage, well, you're blowing it, and I'm guessing you already know this. Everyone should have one. But if you don't want the full-sized Hero 11, GoPro has a solution for you. You're going to get the same incredible video performance of the Hero 11 Black in a smaller, lighter, and simpler design with the GoPro 11 Hero Black Mini. And this little guy features new mounting options, including the more low-profile mounting setup that folks have been asking for, a revolutionary 8x7 sensor that's built for the best social media sharing, and the Emmy Award-winning Hypersmooth 5.0 stabilization, which has turned my once so shaky it made you sick filming style into footage of beauty. And your footage will be beautiful too. To find out more about the Hero 11 Black Mini and all things GoPro, head on over to GoPro.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. This is around the time that I met you at Snowshoe. We met on 2 different occasions back then, and each time I was down there for almost a week, and you took care of lodging and made sure that everybody that was there for the events we were there had a good time. You were there to show us a good time and show how great Snowshoe Mountain was. Everyone at the ski demos that we were there for, Pete Moran was part of everyone's story. It seemed like that was your gig, was making sure that the manufacturers and the athletes got to Snowshoe and had a great time and told people about it. Did it feel like that? Like you were the good times guy?
Yeah, not just the good times guy, but to make sure that people like yourself and people that work for other manufacturers, and I loved working with the shops. And I mean, this dates back to how old it was. I had a fax blast, not an email blast, Mike. I would fax all the ski shops and talk about how much snow we had. But yeah, it was important that they came up and, they got the snowshoe experience and we put a chip in their head. So when they went back, they evangelized the mountain to whoever was in their shop, or you as a rep would talk about it in the shops. And that's how marketing works, is word of mouth. So we really wanted to make sure that people in the manufacturer side and the shop side went up and just had a 10 out of 10 experience.
The second time I was at Snowshoe, it was a big demo event, and this time Shane McConkey and JT Holmes were there. Were they sent by a manufacturer for that demo, or does Snowshoe bring them in to make it a bigger event?
It was both, and I worked with the reps to bring those guys in. And I can definitely say that weekend changed my trajectory and my life, especially meeting Shane and JT that weekend, and then what stemmed from there afterwards.
Is that the first time that you hear about Red Bull, when Shane comes to Snowshoe?
Yeah, it was crazy. Freaking Shane came up there, and Red Bull athletes only wear the Red Bull logo. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And then, he's giving me the drinks, and I'm like, this is pretty good. And so afterwards, there's some bridges, and Shane was a base jumper outside of an awesome skier. And he's like, hey, Pete. And I'd only met the guy for 3 days. He's like, hey, Pete, I know about these bridges near Charleston where I'm flying out, but I need some help. Will you come with me? And I'm like, why the hell would I not come with this guy? I mean, he had just incredible energy, bigger than life. And so I ended up going with Shane to these bridges, and some of the bridges were so low. I had to do what you call a pilot assist, where I pull his parachute for him because there's not enough room between the bridge and the ground. And at the same time, we stayed the night there in Charleston, and I got to spend and talk to Shane a lot. And Shane blew my mind that weekend, JT as well. But with Shane, just the whole base jumping off of these bridges that I'd driven over for years, that had no idea that someday I'd be underneath them with a guy jumping.
Right.
Red Bull came up during those conversations a lot. And so, yeah, Shane introduced me to Red Bull. I'll never forget it. It was one of those winters in the Southeast where even though we're making snow, like you can't keep it. As soon as you make it, it's melting. And Shane was like, you got to meet these guys at Red Bull. And he was telling them about me. And I flew up to New York. And I never forget, I flew over the ski area and it was just nothing but stems and seeds. It was just muddy snow. And went up there, had a great interview. And I called Shane and asked him, a million more questions. And then, I jumped off the ledge from the ski business to Red Bull, and definitely will always be grateful for Shane making that introduction. And there's another guy named Mike Rose as well, who was the rep in Virginia. So it wasn't just Shane, but between Shane and Mike, both of those guys, they greased me into Red Bull. It was great.
Today, we know that Red Bull has unlimited resources, but when you get hired, first, what's your role? Are you running a territory?
Yeah, I'm running West Virginia, part of Virginia, and part of Maryland. And we didn't even have a distributor. So a guy named Curtis Ferguson, Big Dog as they call him, we launched that whole, there was nothing. There was no stores. There was no sampling, vehicles. There was no collegiate marketing. We built something out of nothing for that region.
So it takes a while before you get your own wings team and event managers and all that stuff coming out?
Yeah, and so we got to do all that. And what was crazy is Red Bull wasn't afraid. It was always a premium brand, still is. And they're like, spend the money, do whatever. But I would call my boss up in New York. I'd be like, hey, what about this? Did you get my expense report? He's like, yeah, you're doing fine. I got to go. Just keep going. You're doing awesome. Bye. Click.
Everybody was so busy?
Yeah, but also, at the time, they had Philly and were launching in New York. And so while they were grateful to have me launching, or at least I think they were grateful for me to launch that region, it wasn't the highest on the radar for them. And they were like, the numbers work, blah, 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 keep going.
And with Red Bull, it's one of those things where, especially back then, you were given a ton of control within your territory to create events, create promotions, and do big things and really make a difference with the brand. Is there one event in the beginning, in those first few years on the East Coast, where you're almost shitting your pants thinking about how lucky you are to be with this brand at that time and feeling the energy and momentum just looking around an event?
Yeah, but first I'm going to back you up on what a lot of people think is Red Bull is this squirrely animal. And you can't even take a crap at Red Bull when it comes to sports and the properties and the things you do. The best idea always wins. But even then, it had to be vetted through, sometimes as far as back as the headquarters to Austria. While it was the Wild West in some ways, and other ways, it still had to align with the brand and it had to be approved. But it was always a funnel of hey, best ideas always win, but we need to have them approved. But the one that really got me is whitewater rafting is popular. There's a lot of other outdoor activities there, but there's a bridge. It's actually 876 feet high in the New River Gorge Bridge. And at the time, Red Bull, and still is, base jumping, skydiving, air sports are a popular thing. And so I brought in what they call the Red Bull Air Force. And I had Othar Lawrence, Charles Bryan, the legendary Miles Dasher, and Shane McConkey and Curtis, who I spoke about. We brought in all of our distributor partners, people that had convenient marts, people that ran ski areas. And we brought in these 4 guys and we bought a diving board off of this almost 900-foot bridge. And, Shane and Miles and Charles and Othar were doing rope swing jumps off of there. And anyone's ever met those guys, their personalities bigger than life, awesome people. But yeah, we brought in our biggest retailers and partners and watched those guys huck themselves every which way possible off of that bridge and spent a lot of money entertaining people. But that was an incredible experience.
For you seemed tied your whole career to the Red Bull Air Force. And I guess it's from meeting Shane early on, although Shane skis as well. But you got into it where You weren't a kid who was known for jumping off things when you were growing up. You were a state champion tennis player, but eventually, I mean, you have like 50 skydives or something like that to your name. And how do you get roped into all that with those dudes? And what's the sketchiest thing you end up doing with the Red Bull Air Force?
I don't know if I have that many jumps, but a good amount. I got my paragliding license too because of the thing at Red Bull. The one thing I liked about that Red Bull Air Force is outside of just the incredible group of people, just the wow factor of like human flight was just mind blowing to me. And I was fascinated by it. You know, one year for leap year on leap day, we had the guys jump off the Manchester Hyatt there in San Diego. And, you know, again, once you got permission from the building owner, that thing made live CNN hits. You know, it made national news all over for just a simple idea. But I got to jump out of a helicopter thanks to those guys. Just had some incredible times. But what people think is most of those guys are just crazy wild, but they're actually some of the most locked in athletes I've ever been around because they're in high stake environments. So the mentality of that's pretty incredible, but also those guys have a personality bigger than life. But make no mistake, I mean, I remember when Miles and Shane opened up the Whistler peak to peak gondola, you know, it's like, all right, you guys did this base jump off of this gondola. Like, this is incredible. Most people would just be like psyched on that. But those guys, you're in the hotel room afterwards and they figured out a code to the damn roof of the hotel. And next thing you know, they're jumping off the hotel after jumping off the peak to peak gondola. And they're not doing that, Mike, for fame or anything like that. They're doing that because they love their craft. They love their sport. Yeah, those guys are a fun, caring group of people. I really enjoyed my time with them and still do.
I remember I was talking to Andy Farrington once, and he told me that he was doing something, I believe, for you, skydiving into one of the Seahawks games. And he did it, and instead of staying for the rest of the game, it was like a perfect day, and they had the plane all day, like reserved. And he's like, I just went back to wherever the hangar was, and he went and jumped like 6 more times. He didn't care about the football game. So it's amazing how passionate those dudes are, even in the middle of big opportunities like that, where he could have just sat on the field and watched the Seahawks game, but he wanted to keep jumping. And I can imagine that it's addictive like that. But I'm going on a tangent, and I don't need to be. You're with Red Bull on the East Coast for about 3 years, 3.5 years. And how does the opportunity to move out to Seattle come along? Because from what I was reading up on, it sounds like maybe Red Bull wasn't performing like it was in other markets, and they bring you out to Seattle to help change that. Is that any truth to that?
Yeah, there is. But I would say that the Pac Northwest was launched by a guy that we all know, Jameson Keegan, legendary, you know, still is action sports marketer. And Jameson got promoted and ended up going to another territory. So in that time, the Pac Northwest got idle, but it launched and hit hard. You know, I mean, he created some great, like Lords of the Floor and some incredible Red Bull properties up here. But then after Jameson left, they didn't have the Jameson factor up here. And what I was told is that Rockstar had gotten into like a dogfight, a dog war with Red Bull up here in Seattle and Portland. And so, you know, I'd had some good success. I had also met a lot of people on the West Coast. They would bring me out to volunteer at events and stuff. And so they asked me to come out here. I'd never even been to Seattle. I'd been to Vancouver. I'd never been to Portland. And so they asked me to come out here and reposition the brand. And that's what happened.
When you get out here, it's a totally different world, and you have to figure out the whole Northwest because there's that Seattle freeze that people talk about. But really, that doesn't affect you because you talk to everybody, even if they are going to ignore you. They're still going to become your friend because you're going to make that happen. That's who Pete Moran is. But when I think about the Red Bull days in the beginning, because this is kind of when we reconnect, and I'll talk about our reconnection in a second, but it seemed like you were out doing so much crazy shit. Like you had your regular office hours, you know, from like 9 to 5 or whatever. But then it seemed like 5-6 nights a week you're at the bars till 2 a.m. as well. Was that the Red Bull life, just burning the candle from both ends all the time?
I don't know if I was at the bar every night, Mike, but yeah, I mean, you had to go out. And the thing was, at the time, these bars and these restaurants and these accounts, they were all selling Rockstar out here. So we had to go in there. And the best way to get Rockstar out is to bring the Red Bull athletes in or to bring your partners in and buy them drinks at these new accounts that you were getting Rockstar out of. And so we took it really seriously. And there's a group of guys that I got to work with that really dug in. And we had a lot of fun up here in this market doing some fun things. I definitely don't know if I could hang with that lifestyle. Jeremy Jones and I were talking about it a few weekends ago about just how that used to be what you did in the industry. And I'm just grateful not to be doing that anymore, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember your life from that time because, like I said, that's when we reconnected. You moved out from West Virginia, and someone emailed me at K2 like, hey, our friend Pete, who's with Red Bull, he needs a pair of skis. And then I read into it more. I'm like, Pete Moran. I'm like, is that Pete from Snowshoe? And the person's like, exactly, yeah, Pete from Snowshoe. He's been with Red Bull, and now he's moving out to Seattle. I'm like, holy shit, you come out to Vashon Island, I hook you up with skis. We become fast friends again, and we made sure that you were part of the whole K2 program. And you made sure that K2 was part of the whole Red Bull program, and I think you did that with all the important brands. At that same time, the one really cool thing that you were doing that no one in action sports seemed to do was have a huge team sports component. You were managing an insane one. You had a field suite for the Seahawks game the whole time you were with Red Bull, it seemed like. Do you negotiate that deal yourself?
Yeah, myself and a guy named John Pirano that I worked with at Red Bull, it was important for us to mainstream the brand, but also what we didn't always resonate with all walks of life, meaning in the action sports business. And so to kind of cross-pollinate that with mass sports and to bring, a Seahawks partnership in to the fold, it was a great way to show what Red Bull did, but also get a little closer to our partners up here that weren't really into a lot of the things that Red Bull did. So that was the whole purpose behind that. It worked. We had the only suite in that field. It's called Lumen Field now. At the time, it was Quest Field. And most suites in professional sports, they look like a freaking dentist office. And so John and I had this idea to reshape the suite. And we had a DJ stand in there. We had hardwood floors and stainless steel bars. One time I go in there and there's Todd Lewicki. He was the CEO of the team at the time. He's now the part owner and CEO of the Kraken. But he's in there showing Jerry Jones of the Cowboys, the Red Bull suite. He's like, hey, Pete, this is Jerry. I'm like, no shit, I know who Jerry Jones is. But that was really innovative for pro sports at the time to go in and redo a suite. And then typical pro sports partnerships are logo placement and or signage around the venue. And, we don't do that at Red Bull. And I say we, that's how much I still love the brand. But that wasn't what we did. And so instead, we would have guys like Luke Akins or Andy Farrington or Miles skydive into the games. Or, one time we brought 50 tons of snow in and had Heath Frisbee throwing backflips outside the venue. And so that's how we activated and brought the brand to life with athletes, but in a mass sports way. And yeah, that was the first one and kind of paved the way for Red Bull and other sports partnerships.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has been getting people out into the mountains since 1960. And before the internet took off, Peter Glenn prided themselves on being the best in retail, offering the most knowledge and the best service. They still have that, but not everyone can get to one of their retail locations. But there's always the internet, and the Peter Glenn shopping experience is what you want from a website. Smooth, easy to navigate, and full of information. And peterglenn.com has all the brands, all the products, and they always have a deal going on. If that's not enough, they offer free shipping on orders of $49 or more, a no-hassle return policy, and they price match any reputable shop on the web. So please support the brand that supports me, and check out Peter Glenn Ski and Sports before you buy from someone else. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a whole lot more these days. And they have always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you are still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment and get yourself a Stanley water bottle for starters. I'm making it easier than ever to do so. You'll save 30% on all Stanley products when you head on over to stanley1913.com, buy some stuff, and I highly recommend a water bottle and a set of their pint glasses, which I use every single day. And when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST. That's all one word, all lowercase, no spaces. So that's all one word. That's what that means. And you're done. Spend over $75 and you'll get a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. Last but not least is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006. And since they started brewing beer, they've been supporting the sports we love. If you aren't sure about what they've done in action sports, I'll tell you. They're the first beer brand to produce their own ski and snowboard movie. They support a team of A-list athletes, and they have signature beers that donate to causes like Protect Our Winners. And they're part of some of the most important events and properties in action sports. So, they've done a lot, And the next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and support the beer that supports action sports. To find out more about the beers, the pubs, and events, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. What kind of money do you actually spend with the Seahawks for a suite for a season?
It wasn't cheap. It was over $100,000. But in the same breath, we definitely got our ROI on it, because to be able to show our partners that experience in there, they fell in love with the brand for life. So anything in pro sports isn't cheap. So we'll just leave that at that.
I'm just curious to, when you spend a big chunk of change like that, what are the perks that you get? Is it field access? Is it meeting the players? Is it being able to hold the Seahawk on your arm?
Yeah, all that stuff. But I think my personality, Mike, I was just kind of doing whatever I wanted and just meeting the players on my own, because I love being down there. But yeah, there were a lot of perks to it. And again, it was great to take those perks and pass it on to our partners. A guy that's selling more Red Bull than anyone in Seattle, we're like, hey, you've sold so much Red Bull, come down on the field for the game. And it just blew their mind. So it gave us a really competitive edge in the market, that we had candy that no one else had. And then with our relationship building skills, we were able to really bring it to life even more.
The funniest thing about that whole ticket type thing that you did was you were representing, or not representing, but you were working with the Sonics when they totally sucked at the end of their tenure in Seattle. And you used to have so many Sonics tickets, it seemed like, because there was one time where you were like, hey, Mike, I'm going to drop off some tickets for you. And you had your Wings team come over, drop off some tickets for me. And it was literally a 2-inch stack of Sonics tickets for games over 3 weeks. Had to be 150 tickets. And I'm like, dude, I'm out of town for these 3 weeks, Pete. What are you doing? You're like, make sure all the K2 guys go to the Sonics game. And I was like, okay, was it almost a challenge to give away all the tickets you had at some points?
Bringing that up on the Sonics, yeah, that place, yeah, it was empty, and it was fun to give away those tickets. But it was really cool too to see all the other teams come in and play the Sonics.
That was what the whole marketing campaign for the Sonics was. Hey, this guy's coming into town. Hey, that guy's coming into town. And it was kind of sad because they turned it around 2 years after they left. And I don't know if you saw Sonics Gate, but it is a movie that will make you hate Greg Nichols, make you hate Howard Schultz, make you hate David Stern, and it's all just a corrupt bunch of bullshit while we lost the basketball team. But Oklahoma City sucks in general, and Seattle's a lot better than Oklahoma City. So even without a basketball team, I'm happy, and I don't need to get all negative on Oklahoma City.
Yeah, but let's talk about the positive now. That venue that the Kraken's coming in, Todd Lewicki and his team over there built a world-class venue that is set up to handle NBA. The locker rooms are ready for NBA. Politically, they're playing it correct with the NBA. And I think here soon, we're going to have some good news. The past is the past, but things definitely good are going to happen in the NBA up here in Seattle.
All right, well, we're going to leave basketball alone. We'll go back to Red Bull. You level up 2 times in Seattle, I think, at Red Bull, or 2 promotions. You go from managing Washington State to managing the Northwest to eventually managing the Western region. And was it one of those companies like K2 where it was super cool to work for and there's a ton of opportunities, but they paid you like you were lucky to be there? Or do they take care of their employees?
No, I can say, especially owning my own business, I definitely missed my Red Bull American Express. I mean, I had a company car, company gas card, the best health care, and I pay for the best health care now for my family. And Red Bull just did that out of the gate. Red Bull had they took care of people, and not just with the pay, but also with the way they treated you, with the bonuses, and when we had our meetings. It was nothing but first class at Red Bull.
When you think about extravagance with Red Bull, because there is a lot of that. I mean, they don't do anything half-assed. Everything is full gas to the floor. When you think about your most extravagant expense on the road or at an event, what was your personal most ridiculous thing that you spent money on?
Man, the thing is it might seem ridiculous, but it actually created love for the brand that
Well, all these things do. I mean, there's always a reason why people are spending this money.
So there's a guy that's a legend named Jim Gunning. Jim Gunning was the first head of athletes for North America for Red Bull. And this is early on in the brand. And I still think this is one of my most favorite brand stories. There's a mountain biker named Shams March. Red Bull was really active in mountain biking. And Shams, I forget how the story goes, but he's like, hey, I'm going up to this event. I'm not going to make it. He was just wigging out because his truck shit the bed. And, Red Bull was all about like creating love and doing stuff that no one did. And Jim and the sports marketing team at the time was like, Shams, don't worry about it. And just bought him a brand new truck. But the thing about that is, you want a team of bullet takers. And I would say that Red Bull, while it seemed at the time crazy as hell that we bought this guy a truck, I mean, keep in mind, this is in the early days. If you look back on it, we probably got tenfold or more of the investment of buying that guy's truck. So, I mean, there was always things that would happen in ways and things we would do for the athletes that seemed extravagant, but there was always a method to the madness,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everything's calculated and there's always a reason for it. And what I want to know about a reason is why you would ever leave Red Bull. It seems like everything is going your way, given I'm sure things are starting to change internally from going from Wild West to more checks and balances. But you've been with the brand like 7-8 years. You've been in Seattle for 3 or 4 years. And for Pete Moran, that's enough time to meet every single person in this city and become good friends with them. So is it like you have enough contacts already? You know a ton of people, and is it time to spread your wings and branch out and start your own company? Or were things changing? Or why did you leave Red Bull?
I was happy at Red Bull when I left. But in the same breath, you mentioned earlier about I was rubbing elbows with NFL players and athletes of different walks of life. And what I found out is these people had the same great ideas, just like the Red Bull athletes, except there was no one there to facilitate or be the middleman to bring these guys to the brand or actually put their concepts to paper and bring it to life. And so at Red Bull at the time also, I was flying 3 and 4 days a week. And you'd be at the North Shore of Oahu for pipeline, and then you'd be up at Santa Monica, the Red Bull headquarters, and then you'd be in Portland for an event. And, I'd be checking into the hotel or coming back to the hotel and going to room 104, which room 104 was in my room 2 nights ago.
Right.
I just got tired of eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the road. And then in the same deal, there was these guys that I met that I was doing deals for just for fun, because I thought they were awesome people and they were playing in the NFL or playing in Major League Soccer, or they were doing this and that. And so I saw an opportunity to create a lifestyle that aligned with my values, but also not have to beat the road and do it on my own accord. And so the team at Red Bull, when I left, not only were they supportive, they were like, this is great. We don't want you to leave. And if you change your mind, stay. But in the same breath, tell us when time's right and let's do this the right way for you. So it was a beautiful exit.
That's amazing that they're able to work with you like that. And then when you eventually do launch your own thing, you start with Josh Brown and Kasey Keller as some of the athletes part of your stable at that point. And is it pretty much like, hey, Pete, we're your good friends. We trust you. We're on the same page. You can take our time, likeness, and image and go sell it. And then you're putting together deals for these dudes and making them easy money just because people want them a part of their brand?
Yeah, but in the same breath, I didn't even know Kasey. And Kasey was, at the time, he's been the captain of the U.S. soccer team for 4 World Cups. He's played all over in Europe at the highest level. But a common friend of ours, Marcus, who is also an elite goalkeeper, former U.S. men's soccer player. I'd known Marcus for a long time, and he's like, hey, this Major League Soccer team's coming to Seattle. They're called the Sounders. You should represent Kasey. And I built my company on word of mouth. And so, I met Kasey and we started doing some great things. I ended up putting Kasey up in the Blue Angels. We did a lot of partnerships with Microsoft. And still to this day, Kasey right now, as we talk, he's over in Bristol with ESPN. I mean, he's still a partner and one of my best friends in the world. And, he's still in the soccer biz, crushing it. But that's how it started. And Josh was kicking game winners for the Seahawks at the time, and then went on to be the highest paid kicker in the league. And, it was a great thing. But an example of the things we did is Josh had an idea to field goal kick like a golfer would kick with accuracy. And so we went around New York City and Josh was kicking 40-yarders into the Bethesda Fountain, or he was kicking it into the Love Statue or the USS Intrepid. And he got paid quite hefty for a brand for that, but in the same breath made ESPN Play of the Day with it. So it was really fun to do those type of things with relationships that I had at Red Bull, but was just sitting on.
How do you land the most important athlete in Seattle history, or at least arguably the most important athlete in Seattle history, Marshawn Lynch?
Marshawn He's definitely one of Seattle's most iconic athletes. But outside of that, he's a legit dude. And so at the time, I was representing and doing marketing deals for a guy named Justin Forsett. Justin Forsett was still is one of Marshawn's best friends. And Justin was the running back for the Seahawks at the time. And Marshawn got traded to the Seahawks, his agent, and now he's over at Wasserman, who's awesome. Doug Hendrickson calls me, and he knew that I was doing good things with Justin. He's like, hey, Marshawn's coming out here from Buffalo. Him and Justin are buddies. Like, do you have any interest? And I'm like, heck yeah. And I met the guy, and we went on to do some amazing things. And Marshawn's just the real deal. He's a wonderful human.
Well, when you see Marshawn on TV in anything that he does, he's got a unique personality that's funny and it's really authentic. It's not like he's putting on an act. He's just like the funny dude that you see on TV. And like when he stole the golf cart in college, it's all who he is, man. That's Marshawn Lynch. But you had told me a story once about him taking him to the airport and how he would fly to Oakland. Can you share the way that he would go to the airport and fly? Because it's so much different than everybody else that I know in the world.
I wish that I could live my life like Marshawn. He is really locked in on the present moment. But there would be some times that you would take him to the airport and you'd be like, what time's your flight? And he's like, well, they leave for Oakland on the hour. So I'm just going to get a ticket when I get in there. I was laughing the other day. Kasey and I were laughing. Keller, we were doing an appearance with Microsoft, Mike, and I had Justin Forsett, the Seahawks running back there. I had Marshawn there. And then I had Kasey, who was the captain and goalkeeper of the Sounders. And the Sounders recently had just hired this incredible player named Mauro Rosales. And Mauro looks like a movie star as well. And, Microsoft was so excited to have these 4 athletes there. And, of course, Marshawn stole the show. And I'll never forget it. They're signing autographs, hanging out with all the Microsofters. And this lady, older lady, just sweet as apple pie, was like, I just love your shoes. I just love your shoes. And he's like, you want them, baby? And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, you want them? And he's like, hold on, I'll be right back. And he went out to his car, got a pair of sandals, and just gave the lady, signed them, and gave the lady his shoes. That's how he is. Marshawn, he's a character of all characters.
He is. And in Seattle, I feel like you can still see him on Stop Freaking Call Beacon commercials, which I think you put together.
Yeah, we've had some good times. We did a Stop
Bugging Me. Yeah.
Yeah, I probably to the day I die will never do an exterminating deal. But, there's a company in Seattle called Stop Bugging Me Exterminating. And they wanted Marshawn, after the Super Bowl, where he was just like, I'm here so I don't get fined. Like, all he had to do was say, stop bugging me in this ad. And it just kept running and running. And it worked well for the company. And in fact, I laughed when he came back to the Seahawks. People were calling to renew deals with him regionally just to air the same stuff that they had recorded 3 years ago. But the other thing about Marshawn is he takes things really seriously. And I know if there was ever a situation where he had the opportunity to help someone, especially where he's from, but also up here in Seattle to do the right thing. And he's still involved. Like, he's minority owner of the Kraken up here. He's an involved guy and a sharp businessman.
He's a Seattle legend as well. And you and I did a lot of things together, whether it was Monday Night Football in Oakland for Raiderville that we did, or all the different things that you did with the Deadliest Catch where you'd build a big air jump and I'd be on the mic talking about it. But I feel like the biggest event that I was a part of with you was in Las Vegas in like 2009-ish or something like that. You convinced Coors Light and Caesar's Palace to build ski and snowboard big air jump in front of Caesar's Palace on the 4th of July when it was going to be 115 degrees. How do you sell that in, and how do you even make that shit happen?
That was the launch of the aluminum pipe. And at the time, it was Miller Coors, not Molson Coors. But I had a great relationship with the brand. They would come to me, and relationships is how I've built my business. And it's always been relationship based. And I got that from my parents. And I had a great relationship with the team over there. And they came to me, they were like, we need something that's bold and big and cold, Rocky Mountain refreshing. And we need to do an experiential because we need something to show our big casino partners and our partners. We've got this activation area. What do we do? And so there was some people that I'd met at Red Bull that were doing these smaller rail jams. And I went to them and I'm like, hey, what if we were able to do this on a bigger scale with a bigger budget and bring this to life in Las Vegas? And by the way, it's going to be, freaking 110 degrees. Are you sure like you're going to be able to make this work? And, relationships and good ideas, we made that happen. And the most fun part about that down there at Caesar's Palace is, one, the experience the snowboarders got of getting to ride in that type of venue. Molson Coors, they left a lasting impact with Caesar's Palace and all of that. But everyone wanted to see us fail. That's what I love most about that event is people are like, oh, the snow's going to melt. It's 110 degrees. And it absolutely was. And I remember, we did it July 3rd and 4th and walking out on the 4th, and there was still a shitload of snow left from the 3rd. Those are things that all come through relationships and good ideas with good partners.
All right. Well, that was the highlight of me working with you. We've had many highlights not working, which are really the most fun parts of me hanging out with you, I feel like, is when we're not doing anything work related. But your career's been an amazing one, and we could keep talking about it, but we're not going to because now it's time for inappropriate questions. And this is where I get a friend of ours to come up with 3 questions for you, and they can be anything. And I wanted to take this one way back to a guy we've both known forever. He's a longtime Red Bull guy who recently left his Seattle Red Bull spot for the mountains of Montana to become the general manager of The Florist, a weed empire that features 5 locations to pair with its cultivation and extraction businesses. I'm talking about Bob Snyder, and are you ready for question number 1 from Bob?
Is he the only person you got questions from?
Yes.
Oh, Lord. All right, go ahead.
Here we go with question number 1.
You were in the ski industry back in the day, and I remember you had to do an RV tour the first summer I met you. I met up with you a few times on the road while you were doing this RV tour. And there was a lot of wheeling and dealing going on. I'm just interested to hear, what is the most unique thing that you had to wheel and deal for to get that thing placed in a certain area or get out of trouble? Like, there was a lot of that going on. So I'm just interested, what was the most unique deal that you had to pull together for that tour?
Event life on the road. I want my RV in a prime location. I'm going to give you this to get that. What are you wheeling and dealing, Pete?
Well, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing given I had an endless supply of lift tickets. But the most wheeling and dealing had nothing to do with prime placement for the RV. It was actually to get us out of trouble. We were in Outer Banks, North Carolina, and we've been on the road for a while, and I was still getting used to the RV dump tank and the gray water and hooking that up.
Right.
Rob and I pull up to this beautiful spot on the beach. It's October. We're like, man, it's Outer Banks. We're going to surf. We got wetsuits. We got boards. We got prime location. And Rob's like, Pete, I'm going to hook up the tank. And I'm like, oh, great, man. And we literally emptied the whole tank full of shit in the middle of an RV park packed with people. The owner was irate. I was embarrassed. I mean, it smelled so bad. And so I ended up having to drop my company credit card as well as to give everyone at the RV place lift tickets. It was so bad we had to leave, but it was all we could do not to get our ass kicked.
Oh, man, that is funny. All right, we're going to jump into question number 2.
The second question is, we've had some unique meetings and lunches, and when he had a office over in Kirkland, we would kind of play an activity to spice things up with the older, stodgier crowd that was in that area taking lunch breaks and stuff. So I'm wondering if he can tell the story of what we did to kind of spice things up a little bit. And the little hint is it had to use his phone and a portable speaker.
This goes back to Shane McConkey. Shane used to say that farting was funny. And sometimes you just need to have some good, clean, harmless fun. And a few years ago, some friends and I downloaded a fart app on our phone. And then we would hide Bluetooth speakers around really nice areas. And people would be in their suits at this really serious meetings. And they'd be standing by this bush where they always had their post-lunch debrief. And we'd just be going crazy with the fart app. Could not stop laughing. It was epic.
Let's go with our final inappropriate question.
So after hours, we were known to partake in a particular activity. This could be done after wedding parties, and we're quite world renowned for this activity. So, Pete, why don't you tell everybody your secret skill in the after party scene?
I've never seen a secret skill in the after party scene from you, so this is going to be a surprise to me as well. What is it, Pete?
I'm not talking about it.
What do you mean?
It's just a secret. We're going to leave it as a secret.
All right, man. Well, we can do that. That was inappropriate questions. And that's the podcast, Pete. And you've become such a good friend over the years, over the past 20 years. And I don't know, I guess so many of our jobs in action sports, our identities defined by that job. But while there's been a little bit of that for you, you've never really been just the Red Bull guy or just that. You've always been Pete Moran or that guy Pete, and everybody knows your name. And there's something to be said for your infectious personality and how you always get to know people. And while sometimes it might bug me, I love it at the same time as well. And I thank you for your time, Pete.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
So that was time with Pete Moran. And I don't know if you could tell, but he's an extrovert and a talker. It's like if we pull up to a 7-Eleven, I'll offer to go in and buy whatever we need, because I know if Pete goes in, he's going to have a long, meaningful conversation with Rohan. Then after 10 minutes of me thinking, hurry up, Pete, he'll get in the car and start telling me about Rohan. I usually respond, Pete, I don't care if Rohan's sister-in-law just got into Pepperdine. I just wanted a drink. And I know, I'm a dick that I don't care about Rohan's sister-in-law. In fact, I like the simple pleasure of only knowing that I have to say hi and thank you to Rohan. But Pete is a different breed, and it really is a magical thing that, along with his crazy work ethic, has created his one-of-a-kind business, the ZJ Group. And things seem to be thriving. That's the podcast. At this point, please leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or say something on social media and tag me. If I read it on the show, or if you have a funny story about a guest that you email over at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I read that on the show, you will be the winner of a super limited edition multicam Powell Movement hat. There are only a few of these, and they are sick. And your review or email has to be good, as I'm going to be very stingy about giving these hats out. And you can insert whatever stingy joke you like there. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to offend anyone in my tribe. Finally, please support my amazing sponsors. I only work with the best, and they are Elon Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, GoPro, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.